A viewer left a comment to one of my videos and asked if I could do one on character of discharge determinations. And at first I was really apprehensive because this stuff gets super complicated super fast. And then I thought to myself, dude, you've got a YouTube channel dedicated to explaining complicated topics with VA disability benefits. Why don't you just go ahead and do it? I thought, okay, fine. So here we go. Complicated topic. Be sure to watch to the end because I'm going to cover a lot of material, and there are a lot of different terms I'm going to use throughout this video, but they get used in different ways in different contexts. So I said, it gets a little complicated. Here we go. Now, when I say characterization of discharge, I don't mean the characterization of discharge that is on a veteran's DD-214, which is that document a veteran gets when they leave the military. Now, when someone leaves the military and they get their DD-214, they do get a characterization of discharge, but the VA isn't necessarily concerned with that right away. When you leave the military and you get this characterization of discharge from the Department of Defense, the military that is, there are 5 different types of discharges that a veteran might get. Really 6. But the 5 main ones are honorable, general under honorable conditions, or general as most people call them, other than honorable discharge, which a lot of people refer to as OTH, and that's what I'll refer to it as in the video, as well as a bad conduct discharge or a dishonorable discharge. Now, an honorable discharge is what a veteran might get if they do their term of service and they serve adequately. Not great, not bad, they didn't get in trouble, but they got out on their what they call ETS, or expiration of term of service date, or maybe they got discharged but not in a bad way. They maybe just got a family care plan discharge or something, but they were separated from the military, no hard feelings. They get an honorable discharge. The VA is going to grant all the benefits. It's a perfectly normal discharge. The general under honorable conditions discharge, or general discharge, gets a little more complicated, but a veteran will get most of their benefits. And the VA doesn't really care about this one either. For their purposes, it entitles you to disability compensation benefits. No big deal. Now, the third type of administrative discharge is the other than honorable, or OTH discharge. This is usually given to soldiers, or rather service members, when there is significant misconduct or serious misconduct in the file, but the veteran didn't actually go to court-martial for that. So maybe it's a pattern of drug use or significant misconduct where it didn't warrant a general discharge, but also didn't warrant to go to court-martial. Now, generally speaking, if this kind of discharge occurs, the veteran is entitled to a discharge board when they're still in the service. And it's a little bit more of a process, but still, it can create some complications for the VA. The last 2 discharges, bad conduct and dishonorable discharges, are only available when an individual has been court-martialed, right? So a court-martial can give a bad conduct or dishonorable discharge as punishment. They don't always, but they can. Now, jumping over to the VA side, they use similar language, but in a different way, right? You thought the Army, or you thought the military butchered English? Wait till you get to the VA. Now, the VA will grant disability compensation when a discharge is other than dishonorable. It's not an OTH discharge, but other than dishonorable. And you're thinking, wait a second, there are 4 discharges. Other than dishonorable just means I can't have a dishonorable discharge, right? Well, not so fast. Honorable and general conditions automatically other than dishonorable. Dishonorable is not other than dishonorable. Bad conduct is still considered dishonorable in most circumstances. The one where there's a little bit of a gray area and the VA has to do that characterization of discharge determination is the other than honorable discharge. It's where there's been a pattern of misconduct or some sort of other significant misconduct short of warranting a court-martial. Now, how do we know if an other than honorable discharge is other than dishonorable? The VA wants to know what the circumstances were surrounding that other than honorable discharge, and was the misconduct that led up to the discharge willful and persistent. So here's how this works in practice. When a veteran wants to apply for disability compensation, what they'll do is they'll submit an application, that 21526EZ, or they'll go online and do it on va.gov. And if there's an other than honorable discharge in the file, the VA will want to do this characterization of discharge to do an analysis of the facts and circumstances surrounding the other than honorable discharge to see if the misconduct was willful and persistent. What will happen is, first, is that the VA will send the veteran a letter saying, "We're working on your file." And then the veteran might get a letter saying, "We see that there's another than honorable discharge in here. If you'd like a hearing to discuss the facts and circumstances, please select a hearing within 30 or 60 days. Depends what the letter says." And it'll also say things like, you can submit your own evidence if you want. And this can be written statements, sworn statements, news articles, really anything that supports your claim that your misconduct that led to the discharge was not willful and persistent. Maybe there are some mitigating factors or facts and circumstances surrounding your discharge that the VA should consider that make it not look or not seem like it was a willful and persistent misconduct. Eventually, the VA will take all that evidence and they'll look at it and go, okay, was this conduct willful and persistent? And then they'll issue an administrative decision along with a rating decision and send that to the veteran. And the administrative decision will discuss whether or not the conduct was willful and persistent and what benefits the veteran might be entitled to. Now, even in cases where disability benefits might not apply, if the injury is service-connected for medical purposes, the veteran might still get the medical care even if they don't get disability compensation. And we see this a lot where perhaps there is a psychological component where the veteran has PTSD and they need medical care for this PTSD and therapy, but they're not going to see disability compensation for it. Now, what is willful and persistent misconduct? This is a good question because it's not really explained well in the rules, and we have to really look to some case law to see what the VA is going to consider this. And this is a problem that I'll talk about in a minute. Willful and persistent misconduct is not things like a single instance of drug use. Some at the VA think it is, but it's really not because there are rules that say it. Single instance is not willful and persistent. How can you have something that's persistent if it only happened one time, right? Makes sense. So again, a lot of factors go into these determinations, and it's not always straightforward. Also, when a veteran receives a determination, they can appeal it, and oftentimes they probably should. This is something that you can appeal through the normal channels, either in a higher level review, supplemental claim, or up to the Board of Veterans Appeals. But again, you gotta move quickly. You only have 1 year to appeal this, and that year goes fast. I wanna give you some examples. Let's say Private Snuffy is an airborne paratrooper who has a bad jump and injures their back. They go to medical, they go on profile, they get physical therapy, and they get some drugs to help them with the back pain, but it keeps going on and on and on. And eventually they are at their end of their rope and they decide to smoke some marijuana to help ease the pain. Now, I don't know if marijuana treats back pain. I just know that it's legal in certain states, but not legal in the military. Well, Private Snuffy comes back on leave. They ask them to do urinalysis. And by ask, I mean, they tell him to go pee in a cup. It's not like Private Snuffy has a choice. And when the drug test comes back, it's positive for marijuana. Now, this alone should not generally lead to an other than honorable discharge, but let's say it does for this example. Private Snuffy gets out of the military with his other than honorable discharge. They go to apply to the VA for disability compensation. The VA will, again, go through this process where they'll send Private Snuffy, now Mr. Snuffy, a letter saying, hey, tell us what's going on, what happened with this discharge. You can request a hearing to discuss it, and then they'll make a decision. Now, the letter might come back and say, well, we're not going to grant you disability compensation, but we're going to grant you the right to medical care for your back condition at a VA hospital or at the VA's expense. Sometimes it might grant nothing at all. Private Snuffy could appeal this, and probably should if it was just one instance of marijuana usage that resulted in this other than honorable discharge. Now, it gets even more complicated than this. Now, as you know, veterans, or when you join the military, you might join for 3 or 4 or 5 years and then re-enlist and sign a new contract and keep going and going and going. Well, each term of service, each contract that you sign equates to one term of service at the end of which you get an honorable discharge in order to re-enlist. So let's say Private Snuffy signs up for the military, he deploys to Afghanistan, and some bad things happen, ends up with PTSD. But before the end of his time in Afghanistan, he decides to re-enlist because, hey, why not? Tax-free bonus money, right? So he re-enlists in Afghanistan, but when he comes home, he's struggling. He's got some alcohol problems because alcoholism is a common comorbid condition with PTSD. Some people use it to help with avoiding feelings of the things that have happened. And he gets into some trouble, and there's a couple alcohol-related incidents, and eventually Private Snuffy ends up with an other than honorable discharge and gets kicked out. As you recall, he actually re-enlisted while in Afghanistan. If the bad things that happened to him happened in Afghanistan and that's what caused the PTSD, those happened during a period of service that is now honorable because he re-enlisted. It was only in his second enlistment that he got the other than honorable discharge. Again, the VA is going to go through this characterization of discharge determination, so it needs to be clear to the VA that, hey, this first period of service was actually honorable, and that's when the disability started. And the second period of service, for which they're not eligible for disability benefits, is what actually got the other than honorable discharge. Again, a little complicated, but because the thing that caused the disability happened in that first term of service, and it wasn't until the second term of service resulted in the other than honorable discharge, Private Snuffy may actually be eligible for disability compensation for that time period. Now, again, there are a lot of negative decisions coming out of these, and that's why it's important, if there is a disagreement with the administrative decision and the characterization of discharge that the VA has made, to contact a VSO, an attorney, or an accredited agent to help appeal this process in order to get things back on track. You can do it on your own, but again, sometimes hiring professional help really makes all the difference. I'm glad that a viewer reached out to me at the time they did, because recently there's some big news on the front of characterization of discharge. Now, characterization of discharge, the rules are vague, and they've probably kept a lot of veterans from getting the benefits they've earned. A lot of veterans have come back from war, things have happened, and they receive an other than honorable discharge, which precludes them from getting benefits. Now, the Department of Defense has acknowledged this and has created pathways for those individuals to apply to upgrade their discharge from the Department of Defense. But that process can take a while as well. If the veteran wants to, they can concurrently apply to upgrade their discharge, or rather, they can apply to the VA, not to upgrade their discharge, but to have the VA view their discharge in a different light through that appeals process. But the problem is that there is so much confusion around these regulations. It's not clear cut, and the VA is making a lot of mistakes when it comes to characterization of discharge just in the initial application. So what I mean by this is that because the rules are vague, when a veteran applies for VA disability benefits and still has that other than honorable discharge, the VA is just making screwy and inconsistent decisions based on vague rules that just aren't clear. Now, what happened? Back in 2015, a couple veteran service organizations, Swords to Plowshares out in California, they asked the VA, hey, these rules are a mess. And they petitioned the VA to actually rewrite the rules to make sense. Because again, they have the ability, the VA is the one that writes the Code of Federal Regulations through that administrative process. And there's a notice of decision period. And again, these regulations are supposed to match up with the laws, but Congress can't think of anything, and that's why the administrative agency writes these regulations, which in this case, as they stand now, are a bit screwy. So, Swords to Plowshares and a couple other organizations petitioned the VA to update the rules. And the VA said, sure, we should update the rules. And they started the process, and I think they issued some draft rules waiting for comments, because that's part of the process, is that they're supposed to publish these rules and wait for comments from interested parties. But then what happened? Nothing. It's now been almost 8 years since this petition was filed, and the VA said yes, and the VA still has not published the updated rules on characterization of discharge. So what a couple of veteran service organizations have done, along with some big law firms in DC, is actually sue the Department of Veterans Affairs using what is called it's not really a sue in the traditional sense, but it's filing what is known as a petition for a writ of mandamus. This writ of mandamus is what you file when there's some sort of obligation on the part of the government and the government's not doing it, right? So these organizations filed a petition for the writ of mandamus asking the court to order the VA to finish the process of writing these new rules. This was just filed in October of 2023. I'm making this video in early November of 2023, so it's very timely, and we are just going to have to wait and see what comes out of this. But I'm glad that these organizations are taking the lead, which is why I say support your VSOs. This is why they do good work. They help veterans for the most part. Again, not all VSOs are the same, but good on NVLSP and Swords to Plowshares and whoever's involved in this for actually taking the fight directly to the VA. Here's the big takeaway. Persistence. Like I say in all my videos, if you've been denied, it's time to appeal. And what I mean by appeal, supplemental claim, higher level review, or appeal to the Board of Veterans Appeals. Just depends on your specific situation. Second, what's on your DD-214 isn't necessarily a bar to you getting benefits. Sometimes it is. Sometimes a dishonorable discharge is just that. Nothing we can do about that. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes there are things we can do and benefits can be granted. I've heard of a lot of veterans getting turned away from the VA because they have that other than honorable discharge, and that is not correct. Veterans have been told by barracks lawyers, oh, you got no TH, no benefits for you. That is not correct. There is a process, and that process can be difficult and lengthy, but there is a process. So with that said, I love hearing comments. Like, subscribe, share this video. If you have questions, I try to answer them in the comments when I can. Video ideas, drop them in the comments. But until next time, take care.